But first, when the Western Australian Premier made his big announcement about reopening the state, it was December 18 last year. He promised then that WA hospitals would be ready to accommodate COVID-19 patients and that he couldn't foresee changing that decision. Now, I have joked several times on this program during summer that I bet he won't have the guts to do it. But I didn't even think he'd renege. Last night, in the shadows of the day, 7:30 p.m, would you mind, Mark McGowan broke the hearts of so many families who were very excited to be able to reunite and reconnect with Australia. The country's most risk-averse Premier said there would be no reopening on Feb 5. His state would remain shut tight.
Unfortunately, the world changed in December. Omicron arrived. For that, I am sorry. I understand exactly what this means for many people who are hoping to reunite without any restrictions. But from February 5, there are enhanced compassionate exemptions.
Well, for starters, Omicron arrived in Australia in November, not December. He should do his homework. He made his reopening promise on December 18 when we had 3 weeks of Omicron infections in this country. We were told during those 3 weeks by health authorities here and in South Africa that this was a far more contagious virus or variant than anything we'd seen during the pandemic. We were told over and over again. He knew that then. But of course, for 2 long years, McGowan has ignored the expert medical advice, especially from the Doherty Institute, rarely pulls his chief health officer out to present those press conferences, and he trusted his own scientific knowledge, which is zero and centres around COVID zero. So what's changed? What has really changed? Okay, the East, as he calls us, have been through some significant problems with high COVID numbers. And we've had hospitalisations which have come below the best case scenario. But WA is on the verge of having 90% of its population double vaccinated. Omicron is a vastly milder variant in the vast majority of cases, especially if you've had your jabs. I'll tell you what's changed. Nothing. And that's the problem in the WA health system. It is now struggling without a single COVID hospitalisation. City and regional hospitals, as we saw from some leaked emails earlier in the week, are short of basic and essential medical supplies. Space for a spike in COVID patients has not been created. It is a farce. Nothing has changed since he announced his reopening plan on December 18. That's the problem. He's just chickened out and everyone else suffers again. And he's now moving the goalposts to demand that 90% of his population need to be triple vaxxed.
We know the 3rd dose of the vaccine gives us the best protection. We currently sit at 25.8% of 3rd doses for everyone aged 16 and over. What we saw with WA's 1st and 2nd doses is we can achieve a higher rate. We can lift the 3rd dose rate significantly. And we can give ourselves the best chance to vaccinate our children. If we can hold back this current Omicron outbreak, we will be one of the only places in the world that can achieve a high 3rd dose rate before we reach widespread community transmission.
How many months will that take? If they're lucky, it'll be June, maybe July. But that's winter. Not a smart time to welcome in a large new viral load, I'd imagine. Maybe he'll use the fact that it's winter as an excuse again to delay reopening until next summer. There's a good time. Or even next year. This afternoon, Mark McGowan was back to tell us that he was receiving plaudits for keeping WA closed.
I've been contacted by many people, very happy with the announcement we've made. And I mean many people.
He then went on in that press conference to scare everyone again. I won't even play any of it because he spoke about the death toll, the catastrophe over in the East. A death toll which is dominated by those who refuse to get protected themselves. They are far overrepresented, and we have an overrepresentation of people with comorbidities. Maybe that's his concern, that unvaccinated people who refuse calls to be jabbed should be further protected. Is that his problem? But the reaction to his decision last night from one man in particular is quite instructive for voters in May. The bloke highly likely to be the next Prime Minister of this country and likely to deal with the next variant, Labor leader Anthony Albanese applauded McGowan.
Mark McGowan has always made the right call based upon health advice, and I support Mark McGowan's decision. It's a difficult decision.
Think about that for just a second. The likely next PM supports a state still being locked down from the rest of the country and the world. This is a bloke who believes that we cannot create a near-normal society with COVID in our midst, if he agrees with McGowan. No living with the virus in Albo's Australia. He could be about to lead the battle against COVID and take us back to lockdown months, if what he's saying is true. Are we in for more lockdowns when things get tough again, when a new variant pops up? Are we in for states being cordoned off again? He's very happy for WA to be cordoned off. There's your confirmation. Under a Labor government, Albo supports the McGowan strategy. If that's where we're heading, get me out of here. What is also well worth noting tonight about how people have reacted to the news from WA is how limp two key cabinet ministers sounded today when asked to comment on the McGowan border backflip. I think Liberal Party election strategists may have had a quick look over their internal WA polling and realised that many of those in the West don't mind being cordoned off from the rest of Australia. Because how else do you explain these two comments?
This is not an issue between the federal government and the Western Australian government. This is a decision of the Western Australian government for the Western Australian government themselves to explain. But I can understand why so many Western Australians will tonight and today be disappointed.
At some stage, you've got to cross this bridge, and it's very difficult. We understand all of that, but from a federal government perspective, we'll provide whatever support is required to WA.
Now, that is not the Josh Frydenberg or Peter Dutton we heard referring to Mark McGowan's border policies last year or the year before.
And then you could have that ridiculous situation, Carl, where somebody in New South Wales could travel to Canada before they could go to Cairns, or someone in Victoria could go to Singapore or Bali before they could go to Perth. That is ridiculous, and we need to ensure we open up as one country.
We've obviously got a geographical advantage as a continent, and we've taken advantage of that. We've got a hotel quarantine arrangement in place. We've bolstered our health response. All of that is what has kept us safe. Not borders being closed between, arbitrarily between New South Wales and Queensland or WA.
How things change. It's almost certain that the strategists have sent around a new edict to government ministers on this, which has implored them to back off. Back off McGowan. After all, they hold 11 seats in that state, and one of those seats they lose from a redistribution. And recent polling shows that most of the remaining 10 are shaky. And you can bet that plenty of those voters in those 10 seats are quietly happy about a relatively COVID-free life. The WA Premier has just made it even harder for the coalition to retain those 10 seats as well. We know about the redistribution, but the latest polling from the state 2 weeks ago says that they're all shaky. It's highly likely that the border will remain closed all the way to the May election. That means Scott Morrison, who's a proven campaigner, won't be getting anywhere near those voters.